Good morning, everyone. It's the fourth Sunday of Easter. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. 3 weeks ago was Easter. And if I would ask you to tell me what Easter was about, you would tell me about the death of Jesus late Friday afternoon, and how it was too late for the women to prepare the body. And so the body of Jesus was placed into the tomb. It was too late because at sundown was the Sabbath. And the Sabbath continued into the next day, of course. And so no work is done on the Sabbath. Early Sunday then, the women got together and they came to the tomb. They were surprised. They were astonished. They didn't know what to think because the stone had been rolled away. And there was an angel saying, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Go tell his disciples that he will see them up in Galilee." I don't know how they exactly felt. The news was too astonishing. I mean, nothing like this ever happened. Nothing like this ever should happen. What do they make of it? This then is the story you would tell me about the resurrection. But that's really only half of the story. That's only half of the good news. The other half is Jesus coming to his disciples and speaking to them. St. John tells us that on Sunday evening, Easter Sunday evening, the disciples were gathered together in a room and Jesus appeared to them. And the first thing he says to them is, "Peace be with you." Undoubtedly, they too were startled, they were frightened, they didn't know what to think. Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I am sending you. Receive the Holy Spirit. Thomas was not there. Thomas didn't believe them when they told him that Jesus had appeared to them. So it was the following Sunday that again they're in the room. Thomas was with them, and Jesus appears again and addresses Thomas. "Peace be with you. Look at my hands. Look at my side. Look at my feet. The wounds. It is I. Come, touch them. Make sure for yourself." And Thomas simply says, "My Lord and my God." It's Jesus' voice now and his words that are as important as his resurrection. His words now are contemporary to them. And his words are contemporaneous with us because he lives. And so the disciples remembered all of the things that Jesus said, his parables, his sermons, the discourses that we read in St. John. And these words now are remembered, and they're Jesus' words given in the present. They're not simply words of, say, Aristotle, the great philosopher who had written some things down. They're not simply words of St. Augustine, a well-known theologian in the early church. No, these are words of Jesus who is alive. And these words mean something. The words that he says in our gospel to us are these: "I am the gate." In order for us to understand what's actually happening, we should go back a chapter. You can read this particular chapter 10 in the Celebrate. But chapter 9 is the story of a blind man, blind from birth, whom Jesus and his disciples see. And the disciples say, Lord, who sinned? Was it he or was it his parents? Why should he be blind otherwise? And Jesus said, neither one of them has sinned. Rather, this is for the glory of God. And so Jesus heals this man. And when he comes back, the people aren't sure, is it really him? Is it the blind man who used to sit at the gate begging? And so the Pharisees say, is it you? And he says, yes. And they said, but you were blind, yes. But now you can see. How do you see? Jesus healed me. Well, they don't want to believe that, and so they call his parents. And they say, is this your son? And they say, yes. Was he blind from birth? Yes. And now he can see? Yes. How did it come about that he could see? And they say, we don't know. You have to ask him. And so they ask him again, how is it that you are able to see? And he says, because of Jesus. And they say, impossible. Jesus is a sinner. He does not obey the Sabbath laws. He couldn't possibly have healed you. He couldn't possibly have come from God. He said, well, he did. Go and ask him yourself. Maybe you'd like to become his disciples. Well, they get angry at him. They kick him out of the synagogue. And so Jesus finds this man, and he says to him, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the formerly blind man says, who is the Son of Man that I might believe in him? And Jesus says, it is I who is speaking to you. And he falls down and he worships Jesus. You see, the story is not simply about a man who is physically blind, who is healed of his blindness, but it's also a man who is spiritually blind, who is beginning to see who this man Jesus is. We are in the same situation. It's very easy for us to become blind. Remember the story in the beginning of Genesis. In the second chapter, God places Adam and Eve in a garden, and he says, you can eat anything that you see here. There are many, many trees, fruit trees. It's all good and nourishing. You just can't eat of the tree that's in the middle of the garden. That's fine. It's easy enough to do, isn't it? However, they begin to wonder, why can't they eat of the tree? And so they go and look at it. Is there something wrong with it? Doesn't appear to be. There doesn't seem to be any fungus on it. The fruit seems to be as big and as delicious as the fruit on any other tree. And so they wonder. And then comes the tempter. And the tempter says, what are you doing? Well, we're looking at the tree that God told us not to eat, because if we ate it, we would die. The tempter says, no, you're not going to die. That's nonsense. What will happen is you will become like God. Well, you see, which of us, who among us does not want to become like God? We all would relish that. But it shouldn't be. Nevertheless, Adam and Eve fall for it, and they pick the fruit, and they eat of it. And then they begin to know the difference between good and evil. Then they begin to realize what guilt is. They know now that they shouldn't have eaten of this tree, and they are ashamed. They feel naked before God because he could see right into them. He could see through them. It's like the little boy who goes into the cookie jar and eats several cookies after his mother had said, "Do not eat the cookies." She finds out and she says, "Who ate the cookies?" And he knows he's guilty. And so Adam and Eve know they're guilty. We today, you see, have a similar situation. We are in the midst of a worldwide crisis with the coronavirus. It's got us by the throat. And we have scientists working desperately trying to come up with a cure, trying to come up with a vaccine for the whole world. And so we watch the TV and we rely on our scientists. And we forget that in the midst of this, there's God. We think we've got it all under control, that eventually we will find the answer. And indeed, we may. But in the meantime, we lose sight of God. It's very easy to do. I was listening to some woman speaking on the radio this past week. I don't think she was specifically speaking about the coronavirus. She was speaking about something that happened earlier, but she was talking about meaning in her life. What did she want from her life? And she said, "Well, I want to be happy." And then she said to herself, "Well, what would make me happy?" And she said, "It's those things that will satisfy me." And so I began to do things that were satisfying. And so I attained a certain happiness. But now, you see, we're in the midst of this virus. If we can live with one other person, it's a lot easier, or if we're with a family. But if you're by yourself, it's very, very difficult. How do you even do things that satisfy you? In many cases, you can't. You're not finding the happiness that you want. And then people look at this and would say something like, everything happens for a reason. And they try to comfort themselves with this thought. But tell that, you see, to a person who has lost a loved one because of the virus, because the virus has attacked this person and caused them to die. Where is the reasoning behind it? There does not seem to be any reason, certainly any reason that's going to be satisfactory. And so we are blinded. We're blinded like this man. Who is the Son of Man? And now in chapter 10, we begin to read about who this Jesus is. And he says, "I am the gate to the sheep." The shepherd in Jesus' day was someone who would live with the sheep 24/7, as we would say, night and day. And in the evening, he would take them to this corral that he had built, probably out of stone, built some walls to keep the sheep in. Wouldn't have to be real high. It would just need to be high enough so that the sheep couldn't jump over it. And at one point, the shepherd would have an opening. He would place himself at this opening. At night, this is where he would sleep. And so no sheep would be able to disappear. No sheep would be able to get out of this corral without him knowing it. And nothing was going to come in without him knowing it. He was the one who was going to be the guardian of the sheep. We are the sheep. He says, I am the gate. These two words, and he uses these 7 times altogether in the Gospel of John, this I am refers back to Exodus. When you remember the story of Moses as he was talking to God out of the burning bush. And God says, I want you to go back to Egypt and say to Pharaoh, let my people go. And you're going to tell your people. And he says, well, how are they going to believe me? Who are you? What is your name? And God says, my name is I am. I am who I am. And so Jesus, by using this two-word phrase, indicates that he is divine. He is God. He is, as God, the gate to the sheep. He is the one who will take care of the sheep. At night, he'll protect them. During the day, he will let the sheep out, and they will follow him to green pasture and to still water. I don't know that I want anything more than a relationship with the shepherd, a relationship with my Lord, with God himself. This is what's so important, and the Bible speaks about this from the very beginning to the very end. The relationship that we broke, Jesus has come now to restore. It's not happiness that ultimately I want. Yes, we all need happiness. But more importantly is a joy that this relationship can give us. A love, you see, that we need, that's going to be with us at all times. We don't need to worry about it. We don't need to question it. The love is constantly there. We should not say that everything happens for a reason. Often things don't happen for a reason. But it doesn't mean that God can't bring good out of tragedy. And so, with that in mind, knowing that we have a God who is a God of love, and we have seen that love in the way Jesus has come to us, in the way he died for us, we rejoice now in the resurrection. And we hold tight to him. He is the Son of Man. He is our Savior. He is the one, the only one, who can bring us hope, who can bring us joy, who can bring us a love that never ends.